Hello, everyone. We are back with Bjorn Sjut. So let me just say a few words about Bjorn. Bjorn comes with a profound sales and marketing track record over 20 years. With one of his first positions as project lead at Gruner & Jahr in the new media department. Bjorn focused on sales and marketing and became director of sales and marketing at one of the leading matchmaking companies in the world, B2, and after that, as well as director of sales and marketing at Insparks. Since 2012, Bjorn founded Finc3 and is the managing director since then, and also the managing director and founder of BizMut. And I'm very happy to have him and to share his insights on sales and marketing, especially on the B2B performance marketing, and how we can make the most out of our marketing budgets. Bjorn, please feel free to fill in any detail I've forgot about your introduction or in your introduction, and have fun with the presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that was a great introduction. My focus has always been on analytics topics as well. So not only doing marketing, but also measuring that you try and move away from a marketing cost to a measurable investment. And I think that's the spirit we want to also follow today. Basically, today I have my B2B performance marketing hat on. So what I would like to cover is basically how we try to help B2B companies to get from having marketing costs more to a measurable marketing investment. And I'll introduce basically the process that we typically organize marketing and sales campaigns and processes in companies, basically how we look at that. And I will deep dive into two aspects. One is the tracking and attribution aspect, and one is the upper funnel marketing that we typically call de-anonymizing relevant interest. So when we look at traditional B2B marketing and sales setups, it typically looks something like this. There's a marketing department that works on an audience, and there's a sales department that actually works on leads and customers. Or you could also argue marketing typically works with kind of anonymous view and reach data traditionally, and sales teams work with leads and customers. But if you think in these two silos, basically that conflicts with the promise of going from a marketing cost to a measurable investment. So our main question is always, what would be a better approach in today's world to organize sales and marketing processes and have it more thought of as a collaborative process in different phases? So the way that we look at it typically is this. We think that in the beginning, sales and marketing should obviously jointly define target audience segments. The main point that is missed there by traditional ideal customer persona approaches is that too few teams focus on what situations people and companies need to be in to be interested in the product or service that we're trying to market to them. Why are situations so important? Basically because situations produce data signals that you can target into. When your ideal customer personas, for example, a startup that was just founded, you might want to do lead generation data on company registers in different countries to figure out what are actually relevant companies that are being just founded. When you are trying to sell, for example, to fast-growing companies, then you might want to look at what data signals growth produce and so on. And then the second aspect is basically the first, marketing role. That is, how can we actually de-anonymize relevant interest at scale? And I'll deep dive into that in a bit. Then obviously, when you have de-anonymized interest, you need to qualify and convert that into real opportunities. And then particularly in long running, sales cycles, there's a second role for marketing, and that is to nurture and educate qualified leads. Because often marketing teams hand over a lead to the sales team and basically say, good luck. But the longer your sales cycles are running, the more you also need your marketing instruments to reach out at scale, educate and nurture them at scale through marketing automations, through paid media CRM, that kind of approaches. And then in the end, of course, someone needs to convert an opportunity into an actual customer. And you need to have a consistent tracking and measurement approach on this journey. And I'll talk a little bit about how to organize that as well. So let's dive into it. What do we mean when we are talking about de-anonymizing relevant interest? What we think B2B marketing should focus on in this upper part of the process is we try to understand with as little effort as possible which companies are in the market for your products and services, who within these companies should you be talking to, kind of identifying the buying center if you're talking about enterprise B2B sales, and why are they in need of the product and service. That's kind of the situations that we talked about. And of course, when and how should you reach out to them. Now, there are typically two general ways you can try and collect this data. You can either invest in media or invest in lead research manpower. The obvious thing that you obviously think of when you're thinking about B2B marketing is typically media spend. But one of the specialties of B2B marketing is that you can actually consider lead research an alternative to media spend. The smaller your target audiences are, the more efficient it is obviously to think more about lead research campaigns. What will it take us in lead research effort to go after a specific target audience, build these, think about an outreach concept to them, versus trying to de-anonymize them via media spend. Now, let's have a quick look at the media spend tactics. Within media spend, when you try to do this in a measurable way, you can typically go after 4 types of tactics. So there's intention targeting, which is probably the easiest to understood concept. If someone is looking on Google, let's assume you're a software as a service company, someone is looking for CRM software, then you can assume that they need a CRM software to some degree. But there are also other platforms that work well around intention targeting. Google, of course, also in the terms of contextual display, but also software discovery platforms. If you're into B2B software products, Capterra, G2 Crowd, for example, that you can leverage as marketing channels. And for the international area, there are also platforms like Quora, Q&A platforms that you can use to sponsor certain content, make it more visible, and also run keyword advertising contextual queries. This is particularly helpful to target people that are more in the discovery phase of their customer journey, looking at different solutions. They will often end up on tools like Quora. There are a number of other channels here. For example, you're targeting developers, software engineers. Stack Overflow by now has an advertising ecosystem. So it depends a little bit on the exact audience you want to go after, but take these as examples. The challenge with intention targeting is often that it's not scalable enough, particularly if you have very innovative products that don't generate that much search volume. You often need to also do profile targeting. Profile targeting can be done, of course, on Facebook, can be done through LinkedIn ads. In the German market, can be done through Xing ads as well. And to some degree, on display channels as well, when you can target lookalike audiences based on your CRM data. You can try on a number of display networks like AdRoll, for example, to target statistical twins of the customers that you are already having. When you are in specific niches and purchasing certain types of goods is actually a good indicator. For example, you're trying to reach out to IT decision makers. You might want to target people that purchase professional network hardware like Cisco. Also, the Amazon advertising ecosystem is relevant, and they are also beefing up their B2B targeting capabilities. Now, with Amazon Business, one of the areas that they try to scale to sell more to companies, we think that Amazon becomes a more important part of B2B marketing in 2021. And then, of course, you can do retargeting. Retargeting, again, comes into flavors. You can do it pixel-based, but you can also do it based on your CRM data and either try to retarget users based on the lead data that you have, for example, in your Salesforce, on your HubSpot, Pipedrive systems, or you try to target statistical twins of those users. In general, de-anonymizing your relevant interest through media spend always works when your audiences are a bit larger, so more than 1,000 people worldwide, typically, and then you need to optimize on that. But where do you send them, right? So now you're running Google campaigns, you're running LinkedIn campaigns, you're running Quora campaigns. What kind of funnels can you push them in to make it measurable and relevant for the user? You can think and structure this basically in 3 basic funnels. First, there should always be some sort of direct response funnel that makes it easy for a customer to actually get in touch with you and try and buy from you, basically. I think this is, for me, always surprising when we work with enterprise clients, really large industry companies, how difficult it often is based on their website if you are interested in buying a solution from them, but you are not yet an established client. So you actually try to reach out to them, then it's often just generic contact forms. And here, of course, you need to figure out what is the direct response way. If you're targeting users with a specific promise, where should they go? What is the promise there? Is it a demo? Is it a free trial of some sort? Is it a free product demo? And that could also be, if you're, for example, selling hardware, electronics, it can also be something like a test scenario that you're offering. What works increasingly well, particularly in English-speaking markets, is having landing pages where users directly select a time to book like a sales call through, for example, a Calendly or HubSpot sales integration. Now, the challenge with these kind of direct response funnels is they are very close to your product, but that also means they will only work for people that kind of already know that they need your product and solution. So they're just scalable to a very limited extent, typically. So how can you augment them? And the second aspect there is typically gated content. Gated content can be built very well around the pain points that you try to solve, and not so much about the product itself. So it allows you to target additional reach, people that are not yet aware of your solution or competing solution, but people that are aware of a certain pain point that you're trying to solve. And gated content can be white papers, can be videos, can be webinars that have been recorded. What works increasingly well is also education as gated content. I think HubSpot is a good example for that, with the HubSpot Academy that tries to make it kind of the standard education path. So when you are a thought leader in your industry and you have a way to actually educate potential clients about their industry and about best practices, then you can think about setting that up as a long-running, high-value gated content approach. When you do this kind of lead generation, you don't necessarily have to do a lot of separate landing pages. You have platforms like LinkedIn and Facebook and Xing that have so-called lead ads that basically allow you to have lead generation forms on the advertising platform, in this example, LinkedIn. That often leads to a dramatically lower cost per lead, but that often also leads to a decreased quality of the lead because you have pre-filled forms here. People just need to submit that. And if that email address is outdated, you might find yourself hunting for the actual contact data. Again, here, when you compare these type of different approaches, a landing page versus a lead ad, you always need to compare the cost per qualified lead, not the cost per lead, because then you might miss that actually the landing page produces better qualified leads, even though this here produces maybe cheaper leads. The last aspect is more scalable, obviously, because non-gated content, and non-gated content is always useful if you want to expose a lot of your audience to this kind of content. You can build it around pain points as well. This, of course, doesn't directly convert typically into a lead, but you can use company IP range de-anonymization tools to understand which companies are in the market for such a solution. So you can have a look at not only the personal leads, someone that signs up, but also which companies are engaging with that. And I'll get to that in a minute. Now, these type of lead research, right? So trying to understand which people are in the market, which companies are in the market, what approaches can you take there? Well, in general, lead research is an alternative to media spend if you have very specific target audiences. Thinking about very special target audiences where you have maybe tens or a few hundreds of people worldwide, it doesn't really make sense to de-anonymize their interest through advertising. It makes a lot more sense to go with a systematic data-driven lead research process out. But you need to think of these as campaigns as well, so that you can benchmark them against other initiatives. Now, how do you do this when you're not just doing basically Googling after people? There are tools on the social networks like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, or in Germany for the Xing network called Xing Pro Business, that give you kind of a pre-sales process on these platforms. So you can build lead lists there. You can essentially run lead research campaigns through them and have a systematic qualification and outreach process done through that. These tools also typically can sync up with your CRM so that you have a consistent process. And then, of course, there are kind of company search engines, and those company search engines can either be inbound company de-anonymization, meaning they try to help you understand what companies are engaging with the content that you already have on your site, like the ungated content, or there are kind of outgoing company search engines. For example, if you are trying to go after the users of certain software solutions, let's say you are an e-commerce software as a service company and you're aiming at Magento or Shopware users, then you can use platforms for company lead research like BuildWith or similar tech. The kind of inbound tools I think are interesting for most companies because you can use them to actually turn your ungated content into a lead generation platform. Tools like SalesViewer for the German market or Albacross for the international lead feeder, but also Kickfire as kind of a real-time tool, or simple IP services like IP2 location give you an information which companies are engaging with what kind of content. So what kind of content are they looking at? How long do they spend there? And you can correlate that also with what campaigns and ads brought them to the site. And this is often kind of the first step to understand if a campaign that is targeting profiles is actually bringing in really interesting traffic to understand which companies are actually then engaging with your content. And if you do this in a disciplined way, what you can do there is, of course, you use the UTM parameters here to make sure that there is actually an attribution possible. So you try to understand not only which company is coming from that specific campaign, but also what job function within that company was targeted and what pain points, for example, in terms of search ads were those companies looking for. Because then if you have a lead research and outreach strategy to that company, you can use that information as a sales signal. All right, so that's an overview of de-anonymizing relevant interest at scale, and I'm happy to jump into any questions further on. But how do you track this in a consistent way? And the first thing to do there is basically to figure out an approach to track differently than in traditional B2C customer journeys. This is a traditional B2C customer journey. There's a person that searches for a white t-shirt. They click on a Google ad. They go to a fashion store. They buy the white t-shirt, and you have a return on ad spend or an ROI for your advertising budget. And this looks very different in B2B customer journeys, because in B2B customer journeys, for example, for let's say team-based software as a service tools like a CRM software look very different. They look more like this. Some person is exploring a tool, doing a quick sign up, maybe for the product itself or for a demo, and then they onboard other users to that. But actually, the person that does then the purchase for the software as a service package is a different person than the one that does the original sign up. So what we need to do here from an attribution perspective is we can't track this individual customer journey, because it would give LinkedIn, in this example, all of the credit. No, what we have to do actually is we have to combine this by understanding all of these people as early as possible in the customer journey to belong to one company, and then track and attribute that company's customer journey. What does that mean? Basically, when you are doing your tracking in Google Analytics, you need to make sure that you not only have the anonymous click ID set, but as soon as a user signs up, you also assign these users through a custom dimension, a company ID that they belong to. And assigning them this company ID does allow you to attribute later all of the events, signups, page views, marketing touch points of that company to that, not only the individual user, but also to the associated company. And with that, you can build company ROI reports also with very long delays, because as soon as you have a stable identifier for a company, for example, through the email domain of a signup, or just through the IP range of companies interacting with your content, you have a stable attribution point that you can run your marketing ROI calculations against. All right, so much for the introduction and overview. Now I'm excited about any questions, and I'm happy to deep dive into any of the aspects you might find interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation and for the introduction. Up until now, I couldn't see any questions from the audience, from the attendees. So again, please feel free to raise any questions that you are willing to ask. From my side, I have a very basic question. Maybe a good way to start the discussion is looking at the different platforms we have. You were mentioning LinkedIn, obviously Xing, but also Facebook that you also could use for B2B. Is there any particular platform that you mainly choose for your B2B performance, or is it always like situation based?
No, typically you would build up the funnel from the bottom. So typically you start with intention targeting first, because the people that are already looking for a service or a solution that you're offering are typically the ones that will have the shortest customer journey. So they're the most easiest to convert, assuming you have a competitive product and offering. And then you would typically extend this to profile targeting. What profile targeting channels work better heavily depends on the audience you're going after. So for example, if you have very traditional German-based audiences in the German Mittelstand, often Xing is working surprisingly well. When you have HR-based audiences as well in the German market, but for most other audiences, Xing will not work in a relevant manner. And the more international and the more sales-focused your audience is, then typically LinkedIn is working better, often with a combination of both LinkedIn ads and personal outreach and lead research campaigns that are being done on those leads. And Facebook is when you are doing, for example, software as a service products that are looking at startups, often works very well. The more digital your audience is, then Facebook often works very well. The more you need to target a traditional offline industry audience, the more difficult it is typically to find them on Facebook. When you have the ability from a GDPR perspective to do lookalike audiences to your existing customers, this works often very well on Facebook, surprisingly well also for very deep audiences that you couldn't target through any traditional targeting means on Facebook.
Thank you so much. We actually got the first question from Peter. So the best way to hand over between digital and analog sales in the process. What can you say about that?
Yeah, typically when, let me just share my screen again. So when we look at this as a joint process, typically here is the first point where data points appear that are also relevant for the sales colleagues. And then we often work with a qualification framework. You can use BANT, like budget, authority, need, timeline, but there are also others. HubSpot prefers something, I think they call it GACP, goals, authority, and something like that. What we typically try is not use just a quantitative lead score between 0 and whatever, but we try to look at, okay, so what are the predictive questions that you need to ask very early in the sales process that indicate that someone from sales should invest energy into this, and then route these kind of leads very quickly to the sales team. And those questions can be answered, for example, through self-qualification because you answer them in some sort of lead form, or it can be done through research, right? So that from the outside, you try as a lead researcher, understand, okay, what's the priority of this lead? And then we would fast track this to sales team. But there would also be less relevant leads that would be just automatically nurtured until they can self-qualify to some degree. So often the issue is, for example, if you're doing lead ads, you just have personal email addresses and it's hard to research which company they belong to. And then this would more trigger a self-qualification journey to try and understand in what context they were reviewing that product and service. And this is actually then used for the lead scoring to hand it over. So there's not a single process point in our view, which is, okay, now we hand everything over to the sales team, but we try and qualify and prioritize this in an as automated way as possible, and try and focus on what are predictive questions that we can answer about the value of a lead. And we try to answer them as early as possible in the customer journey. Does that make sense for Peter?
I certainly think so. I mean, it did for me. And just a quick question to that is, I mean, you were working with startups, I guess, as well. And we have a lot of people from startups in our audience. So we know that in a few weeks or month for a startup, a lot of things changes. So strategies and processes. How bad, or not bad, but how is it for startups being set in such a position to maybe not knowing their customer audience in the beginning, but still want to address the B2B performance and the B2B marketing?
Right. Yeah. One of the things that you need to do as a startup is obviously try and understand your product market fit as quickly as possible. So how well is what you're trying to sell actually being received. And one of the quickest ways to do that is to build landing pages around the pain points that you're trying to solve for your different audiences, and then do this with ungated content first. Try and run these on AdWords around the keywords and pain points, also on LinkedIn, targeting the profiles of your potential buyers. And first of all, understanding which pain point communication drive the most interest, meaning they drive the most interest in terms of engagement. They actually look and review at that content. And then, of course, also in terms of outreach and actual whatever you do, the demo requests or sales interest or that. But this is often missed, that you need, when people don't know you yet and your service, you need to have proper landing pages, proper basically entries into your customer journey around the pain points that you're trying to solve. And you need to understand which are attracting the most interest. So that would be my guidance there. Build landing pages around all of the main pain points that you're solving, run AdWords and LinkedIn ads on them, and understand which drive the most interest.
Thank you so much for that answer. I'd love to dig into deeper there, but before that, I raised the question also raising. I would just repeat what he wrote regarding the look-alike audiences on Facebook. Isn't there a risk that they are built around the personal and not professional behavior of the original audience, making them less effective for B2B?
Yeah, well, the way that lookalike audiences work is you have a list of users, and then you hash those user data, and then you say to Facebook or LinkedIn or Amazon, you say, please give me back the most similar users, for example, on Facebook, the 1% of the most similar users in Germany to these existing users. And it's definitely a hypothesis that we also had, but how should this work if you don't really share that much, for example, professional aspects of your life on Facebook? How could Facebook then detect that this is actually a relevant user? And the only way that you can find out for yourself is you run these campaigns and look at the efficiency. And we've done this for a lot of clients over the past 8 years, and it works surprisingly well. But I understand the reservations, because I had the same. Because essentially it's a black box, right? And you can only benchmark that tactic against other tactics that you're running and see if it is producing the results that you are hoping for.
Do you see there a development within the platform of Facebook, reaching out more towards the B2B segment? So the point that you were just mentioning, that you won't have the information, the career information, the professional information on Facebook, that they're reaching out maybe for exactly that, so that they're kind of able to compete to LinkedIn or what platform ever?
I don't think Facebook did a lot of things there in the past 2 or 3 years to expand B2B targeting capabilities. We have to keep in mind that before Cambridge Analytica, there were a lot of third-party B2B targeting providers running as audience providers on Facebook. There are now account-based marketing platforms that try to generate Facebook audiences for you, basically through the custom audience feature. So that, I think, is something that's offered now by third parties again. It is unclear to me if that is actually in line with the idea of what Facebook has around the custom audiences terms and conditions, like if you can actually do that, and also if it's GDPR compliant, but those providers think it is. So if you're interested in a solution for that, I would basically look for account-based marketing platforms that create Facebook custom audiences. They typically come with a relatively hefty price tag, though, of several $1,000s per month in base fee. And what these tools are doing is they try and build their own identity graph through different identity providers worldwide, and then basically build very deep B2B specific audiences and try to match them against Facebook audiences. That is probably the most high-end way you can go about targeting deep B2B audiences on Facebook. But with the actual just basic setup, for example, I think 2 years ago, Facebook introduced company size as a targeting attribute. It simply doesn't work based on our tests. When you have a specific product, Facebook and Instagram can work really well if you can either find a way to target your user base, for example, through, let's say you're targeting small business owners, then a very good proxy can be interest and that they are a Facebook page admin, or you can use lookalike audiences. And if you are in need of targeting really deep enterprise audiences on Facebook, I would look into account-based marketing tools and determine whether you can do that from a compliance perspective.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So basically we could, within this discussion, focus on the B2B platforms like LinkedIn and Xing. But I just saw that another question was raised by Juan Juarez. Thank you for that. How many people or data points should be on my user list for my lookalike audiences?
Yeah, I think essentially it's more about the match rate. So I haven't looked into the policy document for a while, but you would be able to quickly Google it, like minimum match size custom audience. You probably need to have a few hundred users in your matched audience, meaning you could upload 10,000 users, but if all of them are not matched, then you wouldn't have an audience still. My recommendation is not to upload, for example, your whole CRM database into a custom audience, but segment it out by quality, for example. So you can have something like A customers and try to build a custom audience on this, see if it is large enough. That will always get a better result. And you can also, of course, use custom audiences as a way to exclude people. So, for example, you can also take your worst leads and then exclude them. But you can also, of course, build a lookalike audience on your worst leads and then exclude that audience from your targeting. So these are ways that you can use your CRM data for both positive and negative targeting on Facebook and LinkedIn. And Amazon, if you're running Amazon ads.
Perfect. Makes sense to me. I hope the same for Juan. And regarding that, coming maybe back to the startup situation of changing customer focuses and stuff, is there like a favorite tool you maybe have? Also on the sides of the like LinkedIn on the platform side, but also like within the data point CRM side. Is there maybe a combination, a favorite one that you, especially for startups and maybe even going further with like SMEs and corporates, that you can suggest?
Right. So in terms of let's take a typical growth stack. All right. Typically you would want to have. Typically, you don't necessarily need specialized social ads tools and specialized AdWords bidding tools and so on anymore. Even for larger accounts or larger campaigns, I think they can drive up the productivity. But often they also have the disadvantage that they're not supporting, for example, the full range of ad formats. So typically, I wouldn't go into a specific tool there unless you really have a specific pain point that one tool can solve. What often is needed is you need to have some sort of sales or growth enabled CRM system that you can both do lead research on and also kind of marketing and sales automation, kind of the data hub for this. And I think standard choices for this are either HubSpot or Pipedrive. They both are very enjoyable. I think it's more a matter of taste than actually in terms of features. They're priced slightly differently. And then you need to have some sort of platform or tool that allows you to easily exchange data with other platforms. So often, for example, you need to have a landing page editor. We frequently use Unbounce for that because we think, for example, HubSpot marketing is too clunky in terms of its editor. It's just not productive. So Unbounce, very good tool, connects to most CRM systems with native API integrations. It's mobile optimized and so on. And then you need to have maybe like a generic tool to distribute data, maybe between, you have a long-running sales process, but you need to attribute data back to AdWords through the AdWords conversion API or through the Facebook conversion API. And then you can use Zapier. We found that Zapier is often too simple, so we can't do enough with it. So we very frequently use Integromat. It's cheaper than Zapier, and actually a lot more powerful if you're a bit more technical to do things. So this allows us to run a lot of automations that can't be run inside the product itself. Let me give you a typical example. You're doing lead campaigns. They are flowing into HubSpot. They don't have a gender information on the name, so we then build an integration between HubSpot CRM and the Genderize.io API through Integromat. Basically will take us around an hour to set it up, but then we would automatically extend and augment the data of all of the new leads that are coming in with the gender information so that they can be in a German mail, for example, properly addressed. So that I think would be a typical example where you have a very simple external API and you need to automatically connect your CRM and growth data to that. And then I think there are a ton of very specific tools. Often, for example, it helps in kind of marketing automation if you're doing a lot of templates. For example, if you're really on a large scale campaign, to separate the template building process from the actual send out. So they're very good standalone email editors for that, like Topol, for example, that we regularly use. Yeah, I think there I need some more specific questions to look into typical right tool stack.
Yeah, I certainly think that more questions would help here, but thanks a lot for this very extensive answer to that. And also for me, it was really, really informative to have this extensive answer to the question. So
these are just the examples, right? Integromat, and this is Unbounce, like the landing page editor. So those two are really trusted tools for us that we regularly use.
Perfect. Thank you again for those insights. And since we are now coming to an end anyhow with the time, and especially because we got some very, very good and positive feedback, we always say you have to end when it's the best. So yeah, thanks a lot, Bjorn, for your insights, for the presentation, and especially for answering all the questions. And yeah, to end this session with the quote of one of the attendees who said, "This is one of the best sessions I've came across. Thanks, Bjorn Sjut." So I can just add to this, like same for me, and thanks so much for being here. And yeah, feel free to raise any last points or questions if you have them.
Yeah, I just want to invite the colleagues that if they have any follow-up questions, they can reach me at bjorn.sjut@bizmut.de. Alternatively, you can add me on LinkedIn, but please give me the context of this event because I only accept people where I have some sort of context in my LinkedIn network. That would be awesome. And it was a pleasure to be here. I wish you all an inspiring remaining day.
Perfect. Thank you. And yeah, we will try our best to obviously connect you and the attendees who are interested. So reach out to us as well. And one last thing, we got the networking sessions happening now. So please feel free to just go in there and get to know each other. So thanks again and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.